You're muted, Christine, just so you know.
I know, thank you. Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment.
Maybe people would like to let us know where they're calling in from in the chat. That would be fun.
Well, I'm calling in from Connecticut. If anyone else on the call is from Connecticut. I think at least 2 people here are.
Yes, here we go. Look, from Texas. Great.
Got someone
Oh,
else.
thanks for making it, Andrea. That's cool. Glad you managed to register. Southport, Denver. Hey, Bertie. I'm related to Bertie. He's in Somerville, Massachusetts.
Oh.
Hi, Karina. Karina is in our write-ins, Christine,
wonderful.
that we do with the Pequot. Yeah. Waltham, Massachusetts. Hey. Literacy volunteers is calling from Fairfield. That's good. Must be a neighbour of mine. Isn't this nice?
All right, well, I think we'll get started. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Meet the Author with Elizabeth Chatsworth, author of The Brass Queen. I'm Christine Catallo, and I'm the Chief Librarian at Pequot Library here in Southport, Connecticut. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Elizabeth all about her wonderful steampunk gas lamp novel, and we'll learn the difference between those 2 genres. She will be in conversation with Gabi Coatsworth, who is a devoted member of the Pequot Library community. She's an award-winning writer and blogger, and she is active in the Connecticut writing community. She runs several groups for writers, including a weekly write-in for the Pequot Library. She is truly a great cheerleader for all writers. Her essays, short fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction have been published in anthologies and literary journals, both in print and online. So I'll turn things over to Gabi.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you to the Pequot Library for hosting us this evening. I hope you're going to enjoy this. I think you will, because it's an unusual book with something for everything in it. But let me tell you a little bit about the author first. So Elizabeth Chatsworth, no relation to Coatsworth, although both those names come from the north of England, arrived in the United States from Yorkshire in England and has very strong roots over there because she's a voice actor and wanted to do more work in commercials, book narration, things like that. When normally she has another job too, when the library is open, she's sometimes at the Westport Library helping people find stuff and generally making things go more smoothly there. But I'm going to ask her why she started writing. She did start writing, and not as a child, unlike some people. And she decided that what she wanted to write about was rogues, rebels, and renegades across space and time. So she wrote this book, The Brass Queen, which has become a surprising, I say this not because I don't think it's great, I think it's fabulous, I'm not surprised, but people were surprised. It's become a bestseller, not just in the United States, but in Canada, the UK and Australia, and it's been #1 on the Gaslamp Fantasy list on Amazon for ever since it was launched in January. So it's done remarkably well, and I'm sure she's got tips for the writers in the audience. And I'm going to, well, let me just give you a little flavor of the book first. This is some of the blurb. She knows a liar when she sees one. He knows a fraud when he meets one. In a steam-powered world, Miss Constance Haltwhistle is the last in a line of blue-blooded rogues. Selling firearms under her alias, the Brass Queen, she has kept her baronial estate's coffers full. But when American spy J.F. Truesdale saves her from assassins, she's pulled into a search for a scientist with an invisibility serum. As royal foes create an invisible army to start a global war, Constant and Truesdale must learn to trust each other. If they don't, the world as they know it will disappear before their eyes. So, as you can tell, the stakes are very high. And one of the things I love about this book is the humor in it. And so I'm going to ask, first of all, I want to talk about what this book is. It's been described as a steampunk novel. It's been described as a thriller, an adventure story, stories with like a Wonder Woman kind of a book. And so I want you, Elizabeth, to help the audience here understand how you would describe it and why it doesn't really neatly fit into one kind of genre.
Well, thank you, Gabi, and thank you, the Pequot Library, for having me here today. Yes, is the answer to all those points you just raised. It is a cross-genre book. And some of the genres it crosses include humorous fantasy, such as by greats like Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams and Neil Gaiman, that sort of hint of British humour. It's also a romance set in Victorian times. It's also a science fiction story with alternate dimensions and steampunk inventions. And it's a fantasy because basically anything goes in this particular universe. So there's a lot of different things mixed in there. And to my surprise, it did become a bestseller in a lot of different categories. And when I hear from fans, they're often responding to what sounds like completely different books, which is fantastic, because I feel like I've really provided something that's given everyone their money's worth, because it seems to be pleasing people on a lot of different levels. Some people like the bawdy humour, some like the sort of highfalutin, witty wordplay humour. So some folks are really into the steampunk inventions and the airships. Some like the sci-fi inventions such as the invisibility serum and the H.G. Wells references. And then other folks are just there for this Victorian romance between this cowboy spy from Kansas City who's sort of wooing, chasing and being annoyed by Miss Constance Haltwhistle, this British aristocrat who is very set in her own ways and is also a bit of an adventurer and a gun designer. So there's a lot going on. So hopefully anyone who reads this will find something that appeals to them.
I'm sure they will. And I should have said probably that the book takes place in Yorkshire. At least this book takes place in Yorkshire, which is Elizabeth's home county. And that's another nice thing about it too, because it's got British scenery and afternoon tea and all those kinds of stately homes. It's an extraordinary book and very funny, which was one of the reasons I love it. So tell us how you came to write it.
Well, I was raised in Sheffield in Yorkshire, which is an industrial town in the north of England. And essentially I was born between the steelworks on the one hand and the aristocratic stately manners and the countryside on the other, and within shouting distance of a pub and a fish and chip shop. So all those things that I loved when I was growing up all found their way into this book. And it's told from the viewpoints of this aristocrat, Miss Constance Haltwhistle, who's about to lose her country estate because essentially her father's taken off to this other dimension and left her in the lurch. And it's her viewpoint, the very aristocratic British point of view, and then this American cowboy who of course has a completely different viewpoint on all things British, and Constance herself. And a lot of the humour relies on the interplay between those two different points of view, because what Constance thinks is completely normal, well of course she has a gilded gold carriage in the shape of a dragon. Truesdale thinks is, maybe a little bit over the top. So it's about that outsider viewpoint into this very bizarre alternate Victorian world.
So talking of humour, do you have any favourite humorous writers that sort of inspired you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, P.J. Wodehouse, the humour in Jane Austen, all the classics like Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett, and parts of Neil Gaiman stories are very funny, sometimes a little darker than my humour, but always wonderful. And I think there is a British tradition of having satiric overtones in the comedy. It can be in the gutter and quite bawdy one moment, and in the next it can be wordplay about Latin phrases. It can be very over the top, like Monty Python and Terry Gilliam, Time Bandits, that kind of thing. Just the fantasy pushed to its illogical extremes. So there's little bits of all that blended in here. So that you've got the comedy of manners of Jane Austen and P.G. Wodehouse mixed in with the more far-fetched satiric elements of Terry Pratchett and so on. So all those writers influence me, and hopefully I've managed to create something that blends elements of those things together and gives people a good chuckle on many different levels.
I think it definitely succeeds in that regard. So there may be people who are listening now who are going, I'm not sure whether this kind of a book is for me. Do you have a way where they can have a bit of a test run of this book before they decide to buy it?
Oh, I absolutely do. If anyone would like to read the first 3 chapters, it's up on my website, elizabethchatsworth.com, and you're welcome to go through those first 3 chapters, which basically tells of the first meeting between Constance and Truesdale. And you can get a flair for it to see if it's your kind of thing. There's also little excerpts on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all those good bookstores as well. So yes, feel free to read it and see if it's for you.
So I love Constance and Truesdale, and so would you mind reading for us the scene in the book where they first meet?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So the background to chapter 1 is Constance is about to lose her estate because her father has absconded to this alternate dimension. No one knows that, but she doesn't want to inform people about the family's scientific dabbling. So unfortunately, an evil uncle is trying to declare him dead in absentia. So Constance is throwing her own coming out ball so that she can meet a nobleman, marry and keep the estate herself. Because of property laws, she can't hang on to the estate otherwise. So despite her total incapacity to be socially aware and pleasant in company and all these different things working against her, she's throwing her own coming out ball, and she is just about to meet an interloper. I should also mention she's being pursued by assassins and is wearing a chainmail corset beneath her dress to protect her. So she's about to run into Truesdale, a Kansas cowboy, who is there without an invite. Constance held her breath as she passed through clouds of cigar smoke tinged with lavender perfume. Her guest's fine silk gowns and waistcoats blurred into a pastiche of jewel tones and monochrome blandness as she weaved between the nobles. Her reclusive life on the family estate had not prepared her to sail through the starched sea of British gentry with the poise displayed by every other attendee. It was all down to her speech to prove herself worthy of their respect. This is it, my one moment to shine. I'll make them all love me or die trying. Nothing and nobody will stop me from... Her face slammed into a muscular chest. She staggered back, clutching at her nose as tears welled and blinked up between her fingers. A tall, dark, almost handsome stranger gazed down at her. His eyebrows were raised over ridiculously blue eyes, bright as sapphires against shockingly tan skin. Neatly trimmed sideburns and a square, clean-shaven jaw framed a nose that appeared to have involved itself in numerous brawls. Such a nose must assuredly belong to a ruffian. Heart-pounding, she brought up her fists, ready to punch the potential assassin. The ruffian grinned. Strike or smile. A decade of Mistress Ying's kung fu instruction kicked in. She swayed her weight onto her rear boot, leaving her front ready to smash his kneecap with as much violence as the situation required. The trespasser raised his hands in surrender. If he was an assassin, he was certainly taking his sweet time about it. And there didn't seem to be any telltale lines of hidden weapons beneath his clothing. But what odd clothing it was. The lone stranger was apparently unaware that a gentleman never wore a hat indoors, particularly not a black Stetson that seemed to have survived one too many cattle drives. His all-black ensemble would have suited a gunfighter on the cover of one of Papa's dime novels, save for his leather gloves and lack of a revolver. Did he think this was a costume party? "Are you all right, miss?" His voice resonated with a suspiciously American accent, deep and slow, conjuring images of deserts, mountains, and rolling plains bestrewn with bison. "It's a crowded spot for that level of speed. You got somewhere better to be?" She narrowed her eyes at the inadequately armed gunslinger. "From your dialect, I'd venture you're from Texas, or Nevada, or Colorado, or Nebraska, or, do I get a say in this, Wyoming?" He shook his head. "That's 5 states down, 40 to go. You some kind of language expert?" "I read." Papa's 32 volumes, Legends of the West, contained many thrilling tales, but none depicted uninvited cowboys invading white tie events in Yorkshire. "If you must know, I was raised in Kansas. My mother was an army nurse, my father is a retired U.S. cavalry officer, and my siblings—" "I don't need your life story, thank you very much." For heaven's sake, Kansas would have been her very next guess. Why couldn't he have waited for her to get there? She scanned the crowd for quirked brows and dropped jaws at the cowboy's presence. Fortunately, the tiara and white tie set was pointedly ignoring the stranger, as the British do when foreigners exceeds their comfort level to an unspeakable degree. Or perhaps they were pointedly ignoring her. Constance dropped her fist and adopted a nonchalant pose. He didn't appear dangerous. For now, it was best not to make a fuss and further disrupt the party. The American warily lowered his hands and bowed. "Justice Franklin Truesdale, at your service. You can call me JF." Her hasty reading of Babette's Modern Manners on her way to the party suggested otherwise. "I'll do no such thing until we are introduced by a mutual acquaintance or by letter. Have I ever written you a letter?" "I don't think so, miss. And if I tell you who I am, that would be an introduction, which I cannot do without—" "A letter. Got it." A generous grin spread across his rugged face. Her heart drummed a little faster than was seemly for a well-bred lady, but she didn't have time to consort with cowboys. She leaned toward Truesdale. "Look, do you mind moving out of my way? I'm heading to the stage." "Aha! That explains it. You're the entertainment." "I beg your pardon." "Your crazy getup, the chainmail corset." He nodded toward her next line. Sure enough, the velvet ribbon she had stitched along the top of her gown had slipped to reveal her chainmail undergarment, her last defense against the knives of her family's enemies. She groaned. "Oh, for goodness sake." Constance grabbed the metal links and tried to wiggle them back down inside her gown, keeping her eyes on Truesdale. The cowboy's grin widened, but he raised his gaze to the ceiling. He studied the stars twinkling through the glass dome as Constance swore softly at the unruly links. "This place must be something to see from up there." "The locals call it the Crystal Octopus, presumably because of the display halls that splay out from the dome. The glow of the lamps can be seen from over a mile away." A violent shimmy sent the offending links below the velvet ribbon. Truesdale glanced down at her with a smile. "Consider me impressed." She tugged the ribbon high, wincing as stitches snapped. He chuckled. "Interesting armor. Boy, I sure do love carnival acts. So tell me, are you a fire eater? Or do you have a partner who flings knives at you? Is there a rotating wheel involved?" She gasped at the very thought of such theatrics. Admittedly, the chainmail had stretched her green silk ball gown to the bursting point over her prominent bustle and cruelly cinched waist. The tautness added a burlesque flair to what should have been the most stylish ensemble of her life. But a fire eater? Heavens, no. Sir, I'm no entertainer. As you're clearly not an invited guest, I suggest that you leave before the authorities are called. No need for that now. I'm here with, you'll find the exit to your left, sir. She fixed him with her sternest stare, the one that made her stable boys stop playing cards and saddle her horse in record time. He blinked and stepped out of her way. She swept by the interloper. She'd have words with the security staff about letting in undesirables. It would be unusual for a professional assassin to don a Stetson. In her experience, hired killers tended to be rather dull in their choice of hat, tending to blend in rather than stand out. I'll leave it there. And she continues to ruminate about this unlikely cowboy in her coming out ball for a while, until an airship crashes through the ceiling and things take a turn for the worst.
Terrific. That's wonderful. So to answer a quick question in the chat, the audiobook version isn't ready yet, so you'll just have to watch this space to find out when it is, but I'm sure it'll be fabulous when it comes out. But now I want to know, so having read the book, you've got Queen Victoria in the book, you've got Sheffield in the book. How much of what's in there is actually true? I know you made up a lot of stuff, obviously the octopus dome, whatever, all those things, but tell me what in the book is true history.
Yes, well, in the book, Queen Victoria is visiting Sheffield to open to celebrate her Diamond Jubilee, which was in 1897. And in real life, Queen Victoria did visit Sheffield in 1897 to celebrate her Diamond Jubilee. And there was a great parade through the town with tons of carriages and troops and flower bestrewn archers over the streets, and the whole turned out. They had choirs of children singing, and it was just the biggest thing that had happened to Sheffield at that time was Queen Victoria coming for this real event. So I took that actual event and
You've suddenly gone quiet, Elizabeth. I don't know why. You're not muted, but can you unmute that? Yeah.
I've switched to an alternate mic.
Okay, good.
Yes, good. All right. So there's a voiceover tip for you. Always have a backup mic for when the first one breaks, because no doubt it will at some point. So yes, so Queen Victoria coming to Sheffield, real life parade, and I took that real life event and put a steampunk twist on it and thought, well, what if she came and there was an assassination attempt, and if there was an airship battle over Endcliffe Park, and there were steampunk contraptions, giant mechanical shire horses pulling wagons of troops and all these fantastic things, and mix them all up, and it's worked quite well, because people have actually asked me, well, was there an airship battle to amuse the Queen over Endcliffe Park when she actually came in 1897? And I said, well, no, but wouldn't it have been wonderful if that had actually happened? But at least you can attend it in the book.
And I think that you've got a map of your Sheffield in the book, haven't you?
I do, and in fact, I've got a very large version of it over there, which I can carry over here. But yes, James Artemis Owen did this fabulous map of alternate Sheffield, which I think you can just see, and it mixes the real life map of Sheffield with some imaginary buildings and some real life ones, and a lot of them have personal meaning to me, particularly, for instance, the town hall, which Queen Victoria actually opened on her visit to Sheffield. That features in the book, and it was one of the first Victorian buildings that I saw as a tiny toddler in Sheffield. I was maybe 2-3 years old, and I remember seeing the Sheffield Town Hall for the first time, this great big Gothic monolith, and with this, at that time it had this huge statue of Queen Victoria outside, and I thought this was the most magnificent building I'd ever seen in my life, and I still carry that memory to that day. So I'm glad that it's got immortalized as I approach my frail dotage, that it actually lives on in this book.
Yeah, you see, you never know where inspiration will strike, right?
Right, exactly.
That's terrific. I want to ask you a few questions about how you wrote the book. And one of the things that writers ask each other quite often is, are you a plotter or a pantser? And a plotter is someone who works with an outline, is very detailed and knows exactly where the book is going to start, the things it's going to go through and where it's going to end. A pantser is someone who writes by the seat of their pants. So basically they sit down and they start with an idea and they know roughly where they're going, but they don't know how they're going to get there, and they just keep writing. So which are you?
I'm definitely a plotter. I actually create Excel spreadsheets and do graphs of the different acts and the points and so on. It's not something I would necessarily recommend for everyone, but it works for me. I approach writing a bit like an architect. I'm building something that is going to be solid. It has to be on a solid foundation, and I want to plot it all out in advance, know where all the bricks go and so on before I get to all the fancy windows and the weather vanes and all the frilly bits on top. So that's how it works for me, is to plot everything out in advance. Now, having said that, my plan for a chapter will be, well, this is the start, this is the end, and XYZ has to happen in the middle of it. So when I'm actually writing the first draft, you know, XYZ might suddenly become ABC. I don't know quite how things are going to work out, but I know the overall form that the chapter has to take for the book to work as a whole. So that's how I actually do that.
So you started writing relatively late, I think, but I'm wondering, I mean, knowing how to do a book outline and knowing how to write, it's not easy. So did you take classes, or how did you start writing?
Yes, well, yes, I came to writing late in life. I'd always been an avid reader, and I studied English literature at university, but I was approaching my 50th birthday and was lamenting the fact that you know, some things I hadn't done yet in life. I'd done many of the things I wanted to do. I'd gone to the Sahara Desert and, you know, done all those kind of things, but I never actually started writing. And I'd always thought that would be a fun thing to do. And my husband pointed out, well, why don't you get started? You know, it's not too late to start. I said, well, I don't know where to begin. How do you start to write a book? So he suggested I sign up for a writing class. And I went online, and just by chance, I found a New York Times bestselling sci-fi and fantasy author, David Farland, had writing classes. So I signed up. And the first assignment, we were doing a world building exercise. And I was interested in steampunk. My husband and I often went to steampunk conventions, and we dressed up in all the gear, and, you know, we had these alternate characters, Lady Annabella Hotwhistle and her burly American bodyguard, and, you know, all these ideas. So I turned that into this world building exercise, this sort of mini chapter, which actually became chapter 1 of the Brass Queen, kind of that it seemed that I just read to you. And so I sent this in to David, and he said, this is great. If you turn this into a book, I would gladly plunk down $25 for a hardcover copy, and, you know, consider I got myself a bargain, because there's something here which is unique, and you should pursue that. And if you write the book, I'll read it and give you my critique. And I still thought, wow, this is the first thing I've ever turned in. And so I didn't expect that at all. So buoyed on by that, with zero experience, I wrote the book, and I did a chapter a week for pretty much the next year. And true to his word, once it was finished, David read the first draft and gave some comments, and I was off to the races. But it was such a surprise, you know. I thought I was going to take this course and just write a few short stories maybe, and just, you know, never send them anywhere, never thought about getting published, and it just turned into a complete second career. So you know, you never know, those small acorns sometimes do grow into mighty oaks.
Well, and that makes it sound extremely simple, because you wrote the book and now it's published. But actually,
well, yeah,
what's happened in between? It's a bit like, you know,
yeah,
saying E equals MC squared. But what got it to that point was a lot of work. So
yes.
I think that
it's taken me 6 years to be an overnight success. So yes, I'm not in any way saying it's a fast or easy process, but, you know, looking back in retrospect, it seems that everything just fell into place. But yes, no, it is, a lot of it is just chance as well. But you know, you do have to work hard and really make an effort to get something published.
What are the sort of steps that you had to take in order to finally be able to hold your book in your hand, between the manuscript and the printed book? Presumably you had editors or critique groups or something.
Yes, well, the first reader was David Farland, and, you know, I couldn't wish for a beta reader better than he. I mean, that's a fantastic start, and I knew I needed a lot of some feedback on where to take this manuscript, and one of the ways I did it was to enter contests. I entered the first chapter in particular in a bunch of RWA chapter contests, and what they do is they give you feedback on how they think your chapter works, and that was great. It was invaluable, because what I found out was 30 different people read your work and you'll get 30 completely different opinions, some of which are directly opposite to each other. But through all that, I learned an understanding of audience and what was working, what wasn't. And then I stepped it up to go to larger contests such as Pitch Wars. I entered the Brass Queen into Pitch Wars and was lucky enough to be selected. And then I got a 3-month mentorship with 2 experienced writers who helped me shape the manuscript further. I paid editors to check it out and see what they thought on a developmental or copy edit level. And I also joined local writing groups, one of them led famously by yourself, and you know, having friends who were on the same journey, who were beginners like me, and trying to figure out, how does publishing work? How do you get anything published? How do you keep going when it seems like madness to be spending your spare time doing this thing, which can cause so much anxiety and aggravation, as well as joy and creative bliss? I mean, there's a lot going on there, and you know, you just have to go through all those different steps. Through Pitch Wars, I was lucky enough to gain an agent who submitted the manuscript as it stood to various publishers, and eventually my agent then decided to leave the industry, which is a common thing. So then I was back on my own and continuing to submit to publishers, and then I had an opportunity to choose which publisher I wanted to go with, and I chose my current publisher, CamCat, because they had a vision for the book, which was to take the best of it and tweak it up a notch, and not change essentially what it was about, but just to make it more accessible to a wider audience. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a great home for it. So from writing the first page to actually holding it in my hand, because then you have to rewrite it with the editor at the publisher as well a couple of times, that was 6 years. So 6 years well spent. I mean, I'm glad I didn't waste those 6 years, and I actually did it. But yeah, you have to sort of put in some serious effort to stay the course.
Well, now that you've done it once,
Yes.
I'd love to see a sequel, and I know anybody who does read it is going to want to know what happens next.
Oh,
Is it
yes.
going to take you 6 years between now and the sequel, which I'm sure you're going to do, right?
I am going to do it. It's going to be published in fall 2022. It's called The Brass Queen Grand Tour, and Constance Truesdale and the gang head off to Europe on a grand tour. And the plot is slightly different this time. It turns into a bit of a heist, because Constance has run afoul of the thugs at the British Museum by transporting a lot of their treasures off to an alternate dimension, which they've taken a dim view of, and she's having to get these alien relics to open up a portal to get them all back. And she's also borrowed a lot of money from her underworld arms clients to fund her various enterprises. So she's managed to get herself in an awful lot of trouble in a very short amount of time, and is popping around Victorian era Europe trying to fix her mess and getting more and more in trouble. So that is happening. So I'm working on that right now. And I'm also working on a second project. This is breaking news. I haven't told anyone about this yet, but I have a short story called The Widow's Mite, which won the Writers of the Future contest, which is a free contest for science fiction and fantasy writers. And that short story will be published in the volume 37 of the anthology in fall this year. And I'm working on a novel-length version of that tale, which is another gaslamp fantasy, which has many of the comic elements of the Brass Queen with a slightly darker edge. So, so yeah, there's 2 books going on right now.
I think that's wonderful, and it's not going to take 6 years, which is the huge benefit. I'm going to think.
Well, before I didn't have a deadline, and you know, when someone says, "Yeah, this is going to be on a shelf in 18 months," it sort of puts things in perspective. Yeah, you should probably try and work on that, and not wait until 17 months and go, "Oh wait, when was that due?" Because that's not going to go down well.
Are you one of the writers who gets up at 4 a.m. and starts typing till lunchtime every day?
No, I mean, I have nothing but admiration for those people. But honestly, I work from home, and I'm a night owl, and it takes all my effort to crawl out of bed by 10. I mean, if I've got up by 10, I've done really well. I mean, Gabi hosts these wonderful write-ins at 10 o'clock every Monday morning. And she always wonders why I'm an idiot when I show up to these things. It's like I've literally just got up and I'm making buckets of coffee to get going. Yeah, my best hours are at night. Sadly, I wish I could get up at dawn and get in.
I can't either. I mean, I start these things at 10 because I can't do it any earlier than that either. Yes. But seems to work.
If it works, that's the important thing. We all have our own processes.
Right. So now I know this book has won a lot of awards, and you mentioned that you found contests to submit to, and one of the ones I love is the one that's the Best Banter Award for the conversations between Truesdale and Constance and Truesdale, and it's well deserved, I'm absolutely sure. But if a writer, maybe one of our spectators, one of our viewers today, wanted to find a way of getting an award or something like that, how do they go about looking for a contest to try for?
Right. Well, if you write genre fiction, which is things like thrillers, horror, romance, you can often find genre organizations who host contests, and you're not entering them to win big prizes or anything like that. You're entering them for feedback. But yes, it's nice if you win and can put that on your website as well. I use the Romance Writers of America for many of my awards. I don't know, actually, I've got them all framed up there. Because
very good.
When I'm having a day when I'm like, why am I doing this again? I can walk down my Hall of Fame there and say, oh, somebody liked what I wrote once upon a time. So yes. I should just keep going, put away the self-doubt. Someone out there will like it. Someone out there will hate it, but someone will like it. So, keep writing for that person. Romance Writers America, there's
there's a science fiction organization too, isn't there?
Chatsworth, there is. I'm not sure they run contests like that, but I know the thriller organizations do. The names just escape me, but that's one thing to look into. Also, if you have a full manuscript, then I highly recommend Pitch Wars. That's again free to enter, and then you win the mentorship, which is wonderful. 3 months, 4 months, however long you work on your novel, that's great. If you write short stories in the science fiction and fantasy realm, then by all means look into the Writers of the Future contest, free to enter again. And if you win, like my story was lucky enough to do, which I'm still in shock about, they do actually give you money, even though it's free to enter, and they fly you to Hollywood, all expenses paid, for a big gala ceremony presentation, which I'm going to this fall. So, I mean, those are the ones I'd look for, the sort of, the really well-established free to enter contests. They're the ones I would look for, not these ones where it's just like, hey, we'll make you indie author of the year if you pay us $50. Yeah, don't look at those ones. Make sure they're legitimate. Check out like Sifwa, Writers Beware for contests and things like that in advance, and make sure it's a real one.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to let the audience ask some questions in a minute, but I have a sort of a frivolous question that I want to ask you.
That's my favorite kind.
obviously, as an English woman, you know all about afternoon tea. And so if you were going to entertain Constance and Truesdale, there you go, to tea, what would you serve them?
Well, I would definitely serve Battenberg cake to Constance, because I know that's her favorite, because it happens to be my favorite. I mean, that's a wonderful almond sponge marzipan confection you get in England. And of course, English scones, which I'm very fond of. And I can just see them, the two of them sitting there, Constance with her dainty bluebell teacup, eating the scones, and Truesdale sort of picking up a handful and shoving a few into the pockets on his giant leather overcoat, for later, in case something happens. And I would love to be sitting in on that conversation, because I'm sure that would go down well.
I can also see Constance knocking the cup over by mistake, because she's not always in full control of her social graces.
No, she's not. She's absolutely not. She's so sure of herself, and yet so accident prone and mistaken in her perceptions. But she always realizes it in the end. But my goodness, it takes a while for her to get there.
Well, I believe, I happen to know that Elizabeth has got a fantastic recipe for scones, which she claims is foolproof, and it might even be foolproof. And if you'd like a copy of it, you can ask her for a copy on her website, and I'll put a link in the chat so that if you want to, you can go there, give her your email, and she'll send you the scone recipe. And you too will be able to host English afternoon teas for people. Now, I'd love to know if people in the audience have got any questions that we haven't answered yet. And if you have, would you mind putting them in the chat, or in the, there's a Q&A thing and a chat thing at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you who haven't done a lot of these, when you open the chat, there are 3 little dots on the right hand side, and those 3 little dots, if you hit them, it'll tell you how to save the chat, which means that any links or answers or questions that are in there you can save and look at later. Since we don't have anybody yet asking questions, because we've answered all of them immediately, I want to know whether you go back to Yorkshire very often, and if so, when's the last time and when's the next time?
Oh gosh, well, I actually haven't been back since 2012. So that's the last time I saw my family. All my blood relatives still live in Yorkshire, in the Sheffield area. So I wish I could go and see them. There's been various reasons why I haven't, mostly financial, to be honest. But now with COVID, it's been more difficult. But the good thing is I've actually taught some of my family members who are all on the elderly side to use Skype. So we've actually managed to Skype with each other, which has been fantastic. So it's been lovely seeing them and hearing their voices and everything.
So is this book actually, it's available on Amazon in Britain, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it is. Amazon UK, you can get it there. You can even get it at Waterstones, which is the sort of equivalent of Barnes and Noble over
Clearly,
in the
somebody's
UK.
going to have to pay you to go over there and do a launch.
I know, right? That would be great. I mean, one of the biggest thrills of the book launch this year was I was asked by the local radio show over there, radio station, BBC Radio Sheffield, to actually give an interview. So all my family huddled around the radio, I guess, you know, because it is apparently still 1945, and they all heard my interview live on air, and I've got a recording of it on my media kit page now on my website. But that was the moment where they're like, oh, she's done something with herself. Well, fancy that. Who would have thought books would lead to, you know, being on the radio? So they were very impressed. I mean, I'm not sure they were super impressed by an actual book, but the fact that I was on the radio talking about the book and people could hear that, I mean, that really raised my standing in the family. And probably from the black sheep who went to America for who knows what reason, you know, and now like the greyish sheep who's probably did quite well for herself, considering, because it is Yorkshire, of course, so no one ever does really well, but, you know, good enough.
Right. We have a few questions now. And so I'll start with the first one from Cheryl. Can you please repeat the names of the credible contests to enter? Cheryl, it's quite a long list, but if you connect with Elizabeth on her website, there's a contact page. And if you send her an email there, I'm sure, I know she will answer you. She's really very friendly and helpful, and she'll give you a couple of ideas that you can use. Sorry to answer for you.
No, absolutely. I'm always happy to help anyone who's starting out, or, you know, whatever stage you're at, you know,
Right.
If I can help you, I will.
And let's have a look here. John Campbell said, did you say you have an agent or not anymore? It sounded like you found your publisher without an agent.
I did.
Is that right?
That's true. I mean, I had an agent for a while and they were submitting and they were going to all the big houses, and, you know, I got some wonderful responses. You know, people like, wow, we love this book. It's funny and it's adventure and it's romance, it's sci-fi and it's fantasy. Yeah, we don't know how to sell this, so we're going to pass, but wow, someone's going to love this. So I got a lot of these sort of almost, you know, it went to what do they call it, acquisitions meetings and all this. But I think in the end, it just wasn't, people weren't sure what box to put it in, so it wasn't in that sense easy for them to market, so it's a pass. And my agent decided to just switch industries completely, and then I had this choice to make. Do I go and look for an agent again, and I go through the whole process and submit again, and, you know, everything? And I thought, well, I'll see if there are publishers I can contact without an agent who might be able to do what I want, which essentially was put out a hardcover. It wasn't about royalties or rights or anything else. I mean, for me, I just wanted to actually hold the hardcover in my hand, because it's like, oh, you know, that's what I wanted since I started writing, that image in my head of actually doing that. So I was lucky enough to submit to CamCat, and you don't need an agent to submit to them. So it is a risk going with a boutique publisher or a new publisher or a smaller publisher and so on. But depending on what your goals are as a writer, you might be able to find a home without an agent just by doing the legwork yourself. But, you know, whatever avenue works for you, it's the one that I recommend, because, you know, there's a lot of different ways to find your publishing home.
That's great. My friend Sonia, hi Sonia, is in the audience, and she says, The pantser versus plotter question was fascinating. You say you're a plotter, but there are so many fantastic elements in the story. It seems like it was written by a pantser. Did you imagine it all in your head first before plotting?
Let's see. That's an excellent question. I plot it down in terms of, I have maybe 5 bullet points for that chapter. Here's the start, here the end. You know, this person's going to be upset, this person's going to be happy, whatever. Those are my plot points. That's what I mean by plotting. So it's not a huge in-depth thing. And then I sit and I daydream about those points. So, for instance, I imagined Constance and Truesdale having their first carriage ride together. And of course, Constance has a gun on him for the first part of it, because that's her nature. So that's how that started. I mean, the point of the chapter is just to get from A to B. But of course, it's got to show more about the characters and the world. So she's got a gun on him for a part of it. There's a steampunk invention in the carriage, which makes them a full English breakfast. Because my goodness, if I lived in that world, that's exactly what I'd want as I was riding along. And there's sort of a stove with octopus arms that cooks up bacon and eggs and all this. Constance is trying to be charming, and of course she's rubbish at it. So she's trying to give him whiskey with his breakfast, because she assumes that's what American cowboys must drink, you know, rot gut with their victuals. So every part of that scene, even though we're just going from A to B, shows something about them and the world they live in. And I imagined that once I played it through my head like a movie scene, like maybe 10 times, I know what the characters are saying to each other. I know Truesdale is raising his eyebrows at this whiskey suddenly being lowered on a tray from the ceiling. Like, what is she thinking? I know those characters, how they are responding and acting. And then I actually acted out. Constance is sitting there like this with da 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 da, and Truesdale's like, you know, doing his thing, and I act it with the full hands and everything. Once I know it physically works and I have the language, then I write it down. So that's my first draft, is that whole process. So I call that plotting. But maybe it's pantsing, maybe I'm just mad, I have no idea, but that's actually what I do for each and every chapter. So I highly recommend, hey, if you don't know how to get started, start with bullet points, play it in your head, act it out, warn your family members that you're going to act it out, otherwise they're going to think you're absolutely bananas, but my family's used to that, fortunately. And then you've got your first draft. And don't worry about the language and the sentence rhythms and all that kind of thing. You fix all that later. You've just got your broad strokes story, and you should be able to give that chapter to anybody who knows your characters, and they'd say, yeah, that's them. And that's when you know you've nailed it. Like, you know, the description of the cushions or whatever don't matter, but you've got those characters right and the world's right, and you build from there. So that's a very long answer, which may or may not be helpful.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that you see it like a movie, because I think this would make a fabulous movie. So fingers crossed that they sell it to the movies. I think we've got time for one last question from Di, who says, will anyone illustrate the outfits you describe in the book? And I'm not sure, do you have some pictures of outfits like that on your website at all?
I do. And in fact, when I was writing the book, I actually had a friend of mine draw like cartoon versions of my characters, if you want to see it. I've actually got the original here, never shown before on camera. So Brian Kessinger did this picture of what I imagine those guys were wearing on their adventures. So there are my ring lights there. And this is actually a little later on in the series. So Constance is in her corset and the long skirt with her blunderbuss and her goggles and her hat, and her little Yorkshire terrier who's also wearing a little hat. and Truesdale's in his massive Stetson with his electric gauntlet there and the big sort of leather overcoat that he wears. This, I had that done before, or he was kind enough to draw it for me, before I even finished the book, because it was just sort of, I wanted an image to hold in my head of what they were like, because you can't really find an awful lot of images. There are steampunk images everywhere on the internet, but finding those specific characters was a bit more difficult. So that's sort of my actual illustration of those outfits. And my friend James Artemis Owen, sorry, another show and tell, he actually drew elements of the costumes that ended up in the cover. Like there's a Truesdale's gauntlet. I mean, he draws this by hand. I mean, that's artistry. I mean, how do people do that? And you know, here's Truesdale's hat and the various books, and this the guns. This is what you actually see on the cover here. These tiny guns are actually this, which is amazing. That hat became the header for Truesdale's chapters here. So again, another long answer to a pertinent question. Have people drawn elements of the costumes? Yes, they have. But boy, you know, if I could commission people to draw everybody's outfit, like Welly's fantastical outfit and the godmother's fantastic corsets and spring outfit and all the fancy things. I mean, I would love that.
The Hessian soul, no, the cousin, the baddie, the cousin of the Queen.
Yes.
Who's got fantastical outfits too.
Oh yes, a prince not quite so charming. He's very dapper. I've always fancied him as sort of a very sophisticated waistcoats and just terribly flash and, you know,
Victorian glamour, right?
Exactly, a Victorian steampunk glamour. Yes, so yeah, I hope one day, my dream would be one day people will cosplay any of these characters, and that would be fantastic to run into them at a steampunk convention and go, oh, you're Constance, you're Tuesday, you know, that would be a thrill.
Any costume designer in the movies would be thrilled, I'm sure, to do the costumes for this, because they give you so much scope, you know.
Absolutely.
Well, we've come to the end of our show, as it were, but I know that Elizabeth has got a couple of things that she can show you. Elizabeth, do you want to see whether you can play the book trailer?
Oh, sure.
And show people, because it's super fun, and
yeah, I will give it a go.
I've put a link in the chat, by the way, for how you can get hold of Elizabeth, and some of you know how to get hold of me, which is just Gabi at GabiCoatsworth.com, and that will reach me if you need to. But anyway, Elizabeth, take it away. Thank you for doing this. Thank you, Christine at the Pequot, for hosting us again. Here she is, I think. There we are.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Gabi. This was
well, thank you.
And sorry, Gabi, Elizabeth, sorry, I know you're going to show the video. I just want to say thank you.
Our pleasure. We had fun. And thank you to everyone for coming. It was super to see you all.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to attempt to show the book trailer right now. If it doesn't work, you can find it on my website on the goodies page. It's elizabethchatsworth.com. And thank you everybody, the Pequot Library, Gabi, everyone who came today. It's wonderful to chat with you, and I hope to see you in the Brassiverse, which is the Brass Queens universe. So without further ado, here maybe is the book trailer. Thank you.
The airship attack brought an unpleasant end to an otherwise splendid party. 60 gas lamps cast a golden glow over 200 lively party guests. Ladies in bustled silk gowns waltzed with dashing fellows in white tie evening dress. the orchestra transitioned from a waltz to a joyous interpretation of the Imperial March. A thunderous cheer went up from the crowd as Queen Victoria's Jubilee favourite played. Hundreds of British flags festooned across the great glass dome of the hall waved patriotically against the night sky. Everything was running like clockwork. The Brass Queen will arrive January 2021.
So there we go, a bit of a Monty Python ending, so which quite sums up the book, really. So
That's terrific. Very good. Thank you.
thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And thank you, Elizabeth and Gabby. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.